Kesubos Daf Samach Vav contains two Mishnayos, really one Mishnah that's broken up, which introduces a new topic. Until the Mishnah, we have two subjects. We have the discussion of a woman's work and her found objects, who they go to, and how found objects line up in the list of work that she does. And then we have the embarrassment that's caused to a woman and the penalty the one has to pay, how that affects her husband. Then the next Mishnah will introduce a topic which will take us to the rest of the parak, and that is the dowry, the nadan, that a woman brings in to give to her husband as part of the marriage, and how he promises to repay that at the end of the marriage, which he writes in the Kesubah, and how that's evaluated. So let's begin. We're discussing a woman's found objects and how that compares to the work she has to do. So we know that a woman works. She has to produce 5 slime weight of work that she gives her husband. That's her ma'aseh. That's in exchange for her food. There is a scale of 3 types of work. There's the mandatory work that we said has to go to her husband. There's the extra that she produces easily. And then there's the extra which she produces with greater difficulty, which she really works hard on. Those two we're going to discuss who gets to keep them. And then the Gemara will try to figure out how does her found objects, where do they line up with that? So first of all, as far as we said, as far as her mandatory work that goes to her husband in exchange for his mazonos, what about work that she does easily, that's easy for her to do? She's awake anyway, she's an expert, she's doing some work, but it's more than that minimum amount. So the Gemara says that is a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and a Tanna Kama in a Mishnah as to who that belongs to. And Rabbi Akiva holds she gets to keep that. Tanna Kama holds it goes to her husband. Now, they don't argue explicitly about that. They argue about a slightly different case. The case they argue about is where she makes a neder that her ma'aseh is not going to go to her husband. She says, Konam shani osa leficha. So, according to Tanna Kama, she does not have to, that neder has no value because he has the rights to get that, and she cannot make a neder to keep something which is his rights away from him. And therefore, he doesn't have to be made for it. According to Rabbi Akiva, although the mandatory work she has to do belongs to her husband, the extra work does not. And therefore, she will have the rights to make that neder unless he's made for it. If he wants to cancel it, he better be made for it. There we see that the extra work she does, according to the Tanna Kama, is the husband's rights. According to Rabbi Akiva, is her rights. She gets to keep it to herself. Now, the Gemara says that that's only referring to extra work she does where she works very hard. That's where there's a machlokes. Work she does easily, that's easy stuff, that definitely goes to her husband. That's included in the first category of mandatory work, has the same halacha there. There's no machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and the Tanna Kama. So therefore, it lines up as follows. Work which he has to do, and work which is extra but easy for her to do, that definitely goes to her husband. Work which is hard for her to do, that's extra, that's machlokes. Tanna Kama says it goes to her husband, and Rabbi Akiva says she keeps it. Now, the Gemara says, how does found objects figure in this? So the Gemara first brings a Mishnah. The Gemara says there was a teacher of Mishnayos who taught a Brisa, most likely to Rava, and there we have a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Tanna Kama about her found objects, and Rabbi Akiva said her found objects goes to her husband. So the Gemara asks, why should her found objects goes to her husband? If according to Rabbi Akiva, she even gets to keep her extra work, so work is something which is in exchange for her mazonos, but she gets to keep her extra work, so she should certainly be able to keep her found objects. So first you have to switch it around. Rabbi Akiva is the one who holds that her found objects go to her, that she gets to keep it, just like she gets to keep her extra work. And the Tanna Kama is the one who holds that it goes to her husband, just like he holds that her extra work goes to her husband. So Gemara asks, but hold on a second, found objects would seem to line up with work that she does easily. Work that she does easily, we said everybody agrees goes to her husband. So how could there be a machlokes about that? So the Gemara answers that it's not. Found objects counts as work that she works hard for. It's hard to find things. You have to go looking in the place where the fish wash up on shore, in the place where the deer are injured. It's not easy to find, and that's extra hard work, and therefore the machlokes applies there as well. Now, the Gemara asks, what if a woman does multiple work at the same time? The Gemara says she could do up to 2, 3, or 4 different tasks at once that earn her money, Does that count as hard work, or does that count as easy work? Should that be considered that it's included in this machlokas, or is not included in this machlokas? Now Rashi just gives us an example of how she could do a number of things at once. So the Gemara says she's guarding the squash field, she's spinning flax, with her mouth she's teaching women how to sing, and in her lap she's warming eggs. 4 different tasks that she does at once. Now, what's the halacha? So the Gemara asks the question. The Gemara says, take you the question stands, you don't have an answer for that. All right, now we'll go to our second sugya, and that is the sugya of voshes and pagam when she's embarrassed or injured. So our Mishnah had a machlokas whether that money has to be shared with her husband. Not according to Yehuda ben Beseira, it has to be shared with her husband. He also suffers from her embarrassment and injury to some extent. So the Gemara asks, why should that be? And the Gemara has a series of different things that belong to a man. The Gemara is going to try to find out where does a wife fit in as to whether doing something to those objects causes him injury. Would you say that doing something to a man's wife causes him injury and embarrassment? So the Gemara first asks, if somebody, let's say, embarrasses a man's horse, so he has to pay the owner? How does that make any sense? If you embarrass a woman, why should she have to pay her husband? She suffered from it, he didn't suffer. So the Gemara answers, first of all, the Gemara says a horse does not suffer embarrassment. You cannot embarrass a horse, there's no such thing. So the Gemara says, okay, if you embarrass somebody's clothing, you spit on his clothing, so you don't have to pay for that. There's no embarrassment for that, so why should you have to pay if you embarrass his wife? So Gemara proves that from a Mishnah. The Mishnah says, somebody spits and it hits a person, or if he uncovers a woman's hair, or if he takes away somebody's talis, his cloak, he has to pay 400 zuz for the embarrassment that he caused him. That's only if the spit reached the skin of the person, not if it reached the clothing of the person. So Gemara says, so you didn't embarrass the clothing, or you hit the clothing, you caused pain to the clothing, as it were. That doesn't affect the owner, so causing pain to a woman should not affect her husband. So what right does he have to get anything? So the Gemara says it's very different. A man is embarrassed by what happens to his wife. Pain is caused by him when pain is caused to his wife. Pain is caused to him when pain is caused to his wife. To his clothing, he's not embarrassed if something happens to his clothing. How could you compare the two? So Gemara says, but what would be is if you have a poor person from a very wealthy family. So somebody causes embarrassment to the poor person. Does that embarrass the rest of the family? You're going to say that the rest of the family also deserves part of the penalty that has to be paid because of the embarrassment caused to one person? Someone says, no, it's not comparable at all. A person as part of a family is not the body of the family, not one unit. A husband and a wife are one body, they're one unit, and if one causes pain to one's wife, then the husband suffers as well, and therefore he has to pay to the husband as well. All right, this takes us to the Mishnah. We'll learn the Mishnah together with the initial comments of the Gemara, and then the second Mishnah that follows right after. And it's discussing the dowry, the nadin that a woman brings into her marriage, and the husband writes into the ksuba that he's going to pay her back for it when the marriage dissolves. For whatever reason it does, he owes it back to her, and he owes the proper value, even if it's not exactly the value that she brought it in. So the Gemara says, if she brings in cash, he has to pay her back 50% more. It's not ribis. He's using it all this time to earn money off it, and he would have to pay it back right away, instant later. Right after the marriage begins, he would have to pay it straight back. So it's not based on the time that accrues that he has it. So he has to pay 50% more, and the reason is because cash is very easy to use and make profit off. He's probably going to earn something, so he has to pay 50% more. The example the Mishnah brings is that if she brings into the ksuba 1,000 zuz, 1,000 dinar, that is, which is 10 money, so he has to pay her back 15 money, which is 1,500 dinar. Now, the Gemara in the next Mishnah, which follows right after this one, says the same thing is true. If she brings in 4 dinar, he has to pay her back 6 dinar. Again, 50% more. The Gemara asks, why are both cases listed? The Gemara says you need to talk about a small amount of money and a big amount of money. Small amount of money doesn't require that much work to use, and a big amount of money requires a lot of work, but it also offers more profit. So you have to say a chiddush in both of those, that you gotta work for each of them, and he has to give 50% more for each. Now, the Mishnah also writes in here that if the father promises to give his daughter a dowry, and then from Kiddushin, her husband dies and she falls to Yibam, he does not have to give the dowry to the brother, to the Yavam. You could say, I only promised it to the first brother, not to the second brother. The Gemara says it's irrelevant what the objective desirability of each brother was. If the first one's Talmid Chacham, the second one's an Amaretz, the first one's an Amaretz, the second one's a Talmid Chacham, you could say, I wanted to give it to your brother, not to you. There is no claim that he's more valuable innately than the other one. Now, we've discussed cash. The Mishnah now says, what happens if it's not cash? What happens if it's items? If it's actual objects, which have to be appraised. So here, the actual value is assumed to drop. And here he actually writes in the Ksuba that he's going to pay back less than the appraised value at the time that she brings it into the marriage, and the reduction is 20%. So if it's 1,000 dinar, he writes in that he's going to pay her back 800 dinar. It goes down by 20%, and there's two potential reasons that this could be. It depends how it's evaluated. Some of these things are evaluated at the wedding hall. Over there, we assume that in honor of the Kala, the evaluator is going to pump up the price by 20%, and therefore it's not worth that much. The second thing is that it may be reduced in value through wear and tear, and therefore when it's used up, he doesn't have to pay back as much. There's an assumed 20% reduction in value from the time she brings it in until the end of the marriage. Now, the difference between these two things is what type of items she's bringing in. If it's things that they're going to use as part of the family, then it's not evaluated in the wedding hall. There's no need for that. But there is a reduction in price because they're going to use it. If it's merchandise that they're going to sell, so there is an evaluation in the wedding hall, and there's no wear and tear, and therefore the other one applies there. Now, the Gemara says that the Mishnah says that this could work, this 20% reduction could work one of two ways. It could work if the amount that is set is the value of what she's bringing, and then you adjust his obligation to pay it back, or if you set the amount he has to pay back and you have to adjust what she's bringing in. So, if she brings in a certain amount of goods, and he's going to adjust what he writes, so he drops the number by 20%. If they first write a number, he's going to pay back 1,000 dinar worth, then she is supposed to bring in the 1,000 dinar to match. So there she has to raise the amount she brings in by 20% and bring in 1,025, 1,250, in order that it should be still, what he's paying is 20% less. He's paying 1,000 instead of 1,250. And the reason is, again, because you have to have that 20% reduction in what she owes. Now, if she brings in a certain amount, and that ends up being what's written, so they wrote in 1,000, and she ends up bringing in, it's evaluated at 1,000, situation like that, he cannot force her to bring extra to raise the value. The reason is because here we're talking about where we have an accurate estimate. We're not talking about where there was an estimate that was done in the wedding hall and it was inflated in her honor. We're talking about where an accurate estimate was made of the value of the goods she brought in. And there he can't force her to raise it because it's accurate, it's not inflated. We're talking about merchandise, not things that they're going to use. Now, the Mishnah gives another example, says if she brings in 400, if she brings in 500, he has to write 400. If he writes 400, she has to bring in 500. Anything that he brings in is anything that she brings in, he writes 20% less. Now, there's a lot of repetition here in the Mishnah. It gives examples, repeats the halacha, sums it up in the end. Gemara says it has to tell me these halachos 4 times to talk about a large amount and a small amount, as we said, and also to talk about when she brings it in and when he writes it first, to show that you go both ways, and therefore you have 4 different cases 4 different chedushim, and that's why the Mishnah repeats itself 4 times. Now, in the second Mishnah, we have one additional halacha that's seen, and that's he has to give her money for cosmetics. The money that he gives her for cosmetics is equal to a percentage of the dowry that she brings in. We assume that based on her wealth, which is determined by the dowry, is how much cosmetics she deserves. So she gets 10 dinarim for each money that she brings in the dowry. So that is, for each 100 dinar that she brings, he has to give her 10 dinar to buy cosmetics. The word that's used is for the kupa, for the box. The Gemara says that refers to her cosmetics that she keeps in the box. Now, the Gemara says how often, first, the Gemara says this is only in Yerushalayim. This is the minig there. In other places, it all depends on the minig, and however much it's the standard for her to receive. Now, the Gemara says how often does he have to give her this 10 dinar? So Gemara says maybe every day in the first week, maybe every day for the first month, maybe every day for the first year, maybe every day of the marriage. Now, the Mefarshim explain you cannot keep on giving her 10 zuz every day, but it may mean to split it up over a length of time, and the question is over what length of time should it be split. Now the Gemara introduces some stories about the cosmetics and how it was earned. So the Gemara first discusses the daughter of Nakdiman ben Gurion. Nakdiman ben Gurion was an extremely wealthy person, and for his daughter, they set aside that she should receive 400 gold coins for her cosmetics for each day. And when she received that award, so she said the same thing should happen to your daughters. And the Chachamim said, Amen. Now, it's not clear as Machlokes whether she was happy with that amount or she was upset and she was trying to bless them or curse them. Either way, they considered it to be a compliment and they said, Amen. Now, even though we saw earlier that when she died, when her husband died, she fell to Yibam, the Chachamim did not say Amen. Here they did. It's not talking about the same incident. They did not want to say Amen to someone falling to Yibam, which means that the husband had died without children, possibly at a young age. They don't want to say Amen to that, but here, even though he died, everybody's going to die at some point, so there was no problem with saying Amen here at all. Now the Gemara brings a lengthy story about the daughter of Nakdiman ben Gurion, who became very poor at some point. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was riding on a donkey and leading Yerushalayim with his Talmidim, and he saw a woman collecting grains of barley between the waste, the excrement of the animals of the Arabs. So when she saw him coming, she covered her face with her hair and she stood in front of him. And she said, Rebbe, give me some food to eat. So he said, who are you? She said, I'm the daughter of Nakdiman ben Gurion. So he said, what happened to all the money of your father's house? Well, your father was very rich. So she said, don't you know that they say that the preservative, the salt, for money is charity. So apparently charity had been lacking in the Nakdiman house. So he said to her, what happened to all the money of your father-in-law's house? I remember you had a big nadin. So she said, my father-in-law's money was mixed in with my father's money, and therefore, just as his was lost, his was lost as well. Then she said, Rebbe, do you remember my ksuba? So he said to the Talmidim, I remember her ksuba. I signed on her ksuba, and I remember she was promised 1,000,000 gold coins from her father's house as the nadin that she brought into the marriage, besides for everything that her father-in-law promised to give the couple. These were very wealthy people. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, Ashreichem Yisrael, praiseworthy are Yisrael. When you do the Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nothing can rule over you. On the other hand, when you don't do the Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you end up being lower than the animals of the lowest nation. And here, look what she has to fall to. She has to pick between their waste. It's precious to her what they excreted. So the Gemara asks, that Nachnimud ben Goryan did do tzedakah. He gave tzedakah. Why did she receive this? The Gemara says we have a brayso that says that he would leave the Beis Medrash, he would have cloth spread before his feet, and he would allow the poor people to take that cloth. So the Gemara says, first of all, it may have not been exactly tzedakah, it may have been his covet that it should be that way, or it could just be that it was not enough as far as his means, even though he gave them cloth. As we say, the stronger the camel, the stronger the burden. He's expected to give more than that.